The Atlanta sun beat down on the sidewalk outside the First Piedmont Bank, a shimmering haze rising from the concrete. Inside, the air conditioning was cranked up, a stark contrast that always made Magnolia Maggie Jefferson shiver, despite the heat. Maggie, a woman whose age was a polite mystery hovering somewhere around 60, smoothed down the vibrant floral print dress that was her signature. Today, it was a riot of sunflowers and fuchsia, a defiant splash of color in the muted tones of the bank. Maggie clutched her worn brown leather purse a little tighter. It held a cashier's check, a large one, the culmination of years of careful saving and shrewd investments in her late husband Robert's small landscaping business. Robert had always dreamed of expanding, buying new equipment and offering employee benefits. Now, finally, Maggie could make that dream a reality, in his honor. As she approached the teller window, a young woman with perfectly sculpted eyebrows and a name tag reading Tiffany looked up, her expression a carefully neutral mask. Maggie smiled, a genuine, warm smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Good morning, dear. I'd like to deposit this check." Tiffany took the check, her manicured nails clicking against the paper. Her eyes widened slightly as she scanned the amount. "This is quite a sum, ma'am." "Yes, it is," Maggie replied, her voice calm and steady. Tiffany's demeanor shifted, becoming less neutral and more guarded. "Do you have an account with us?" "No, I don't, but I'd like to open one and then deposit this check." This seemed to throw Tiffany off. She hesitated, tapping the check against the counter. "We need to verify the funds, and we require 2 forms of identification." Maggie produced her driver's license and her social security card. Tiffany examined them with a scrutiny that bordered on suspicion. Then, she disappeared into a back office. Maggie waited, her smile slowly fading. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. She had felt eyes on her since she walked in, not the curious glances you might expect in a bank, but something colder, sharper. She was used to it, to the subtle ways some people in Atlanta still judged her, underestimated her, because of her race and her age. After what felt like an eternity, Tiffany returned, accompanied by a man in a crisp blue suit, his face set in a professional frown. "Ma'am," he said, his voice devoid of warmth, "I'm Mr. Henderson, the branch manager. We're having some difficulty verifying this check. Can you tell me where it came from?" Maggie explained about Robert's business, about the years of hard work, about his dream. She spoke with pride and quiet dignity, but Mr. Henderson remained unmoved. "We'll need to hold this check for a few days while we investigate further," he said, his eyes flicking dismissively over her dress. "Hold it?" Maggie asked, her voice rising slightly. "But I need that money. I have plans." "I understand, ma'am, but this is standard procedure." "Standard procedure? I've never heard of such a thing. I have all the necessary identification." "The check is legitimate." Mr. Henderson's tone hardened. "Ma'am, I suggest you lower your voice. You're creating a disturbance." Other customers began to stare. Maggie felt a flush of anger rising in her chest, but she took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. She knew that raising her voice would only confirm their prejudices, make them see her as the angry black woman they already assumed she was. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice now dangerously low. "I want to speak to someone higher up. Someone who understands that this check represents a lifetime of hard work. Someone who understands that I am not a criminal." Mr. Henderson sighed, a theatrical display of exasperation. "Very well. I'll make a call." He disappeared into his office, leaving Maggie standing at the teller window, feeling the weight of their suspicion, their disdain, pressing down on her. She knew this wasn't about procedure. It was about something else, something older and uglier, something she had faced her entire life. Mr. Henderson emerged from his office, his expression unchanged. "I've spoken to my regional manager," he announced, his voice carrying a hint of triumph. "They concur with our decision. We'll need to hold the check for a minimum of 7 business days for verification." Maggie felt a cold fury settle over her. 7 days. 7 days of Robert's dream being held hostage by their prejudice. She forced herself to remain calm, her voice measured. "And what if it clears before then? Will I have access to my money immediately? We'll release the funds as soon as verification is complete," Mr. Henderson said, his tone evasive. Maggie knew she was being played. She knew they were hoping she would give up, go away, find some other bank that would be more accommodating. But Maggie Jefferson wasn't one to back down from a fight. She had faced down segregation, discrimination, and the heartbreak of losing her husband. This was just another battle, and she intended to win. "Very well," she said, her voice steady. "I'll be back in 7 days, and if that check hasn't cleared, I'll be speaking to your CEO." She turned and walked out of the bank, her head held high, the weight of their injustice pressing on her shoulders. As she stepped back into the blazing Atlanta sun, she made a decision. She wouldn't let them get away with this. She would fight them, not with anger and shouting, but with intelligence and determination. That afternoon, Maggie visited her lawyer, a sharp young woman named Sarah Chen, who had helped her with Robert's estate. Sarah listened intently as Maggie recounted her experience at First Piedmont Bank. "This is outrageous, Mrs. Jefferson," Sarah said, her eyes flashing with anger. "It sounds like blatant discrimination. We can file a complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and possibly even a lawsuit." "I want to do everything." "We can," Maggie said. "But I also want to be smart about this. I want to hit them where it hurts." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Okay, let's start by gathering evidence. Do you have any witnesses?" Maggie explained that several other customers had been present during the exchange with Mr. Henderson. Sarah suggested contacting them, asking them to write statements about what they had witnessed. Over the next few days, Maggie became a whirlwind of activity. She contacted the NAACP, sharing her story and seeking their support. She reached out to local news reporters, hinting at a possible story of racial discrimination at First Piedmont Bank. And she started collecting information about the bank itself, digging into its history, its community involvement, and its reputation. Meanwhile, at First Piedmont Bank, Mr. Henderson and Tiffany were growing increasingly nervous. They had underestimated Maggie Jefferson. They had assumed she would be easily intimidated, easily dismissed. But now, rumors were swirling. Phone calls were coming in from the corporate office, asking questions. The regional manager was breathing down Mr. Henderson's neck. He called Maggie, hoping to smooth things over. "Mrs. Jefferson," he said, his voice suddenly solicitous. "We've reviewed your file, and it seems there was a misunderstanding. We'd like to release your funds immediately." Maggie smiled, a tight, cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Henderson," she said, "but I'll be in on the 7th day, as planned. I want to see what happens when you follow your standard procedure." The clock was ticking. The media was circling. The NAACP was preparing a protest. First Piedmont Bank was about to learn that messing with Maggie Jefferson was a very, very expensive mistake. The 7th day arrived, hot and sticky, just like the day Maggie had first walked into First Piedmont Bank. But this time, everything was different. As Maggie approached the bank, she saw a crowd gathered outside. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes gleaming in the sun. Protesters held signs reading, "Justice for Maggie," and "First Piedmont, stop the discrimination." Maggie took a deep breath and walked through the crowd, her head held high. She was no longer alone. She had an army behind her, a community that was outraged by the injustice she had suffered. Inside the bank, the atmosphere was electric. Mr. Henderson was pacing nervously, his face pale. Tiffany looked like she was about to burst into tears. The regional manager, a woman named Ms. Davies, was standing beside him, her expression grim. As Maggie approached the teller window, the crowd outside surged forward, pressing against the glass. Ms. Davies stepped forward, her voice tight. "Mrs. Jefferson, we apologize for the inconvenience you've experienced. Your check has cleared, and the funds are available." Maggie smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that sent a shiver down Mr. Henderson's spine. "Thank you, Ms. Davies," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But I'm not here just to withdraw my money. I'm here to make a statement." She reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of papers. "These are statements from other customers who have experienced similar treatment at this bank," she announced, her voice carrying to the crowd outside. "They have been discriminated against because of their race, their age, their gender, their socioeconomic status." The crowd roared its approval. News cameras zoomed in on Maggie's face. "I am here today to demand change," Maggie continued, her voice rising with passion. "I demand that First Piedmont Bank implement diversity training for all its employees. I demand that they review their lending practices to ensure fairness and equity. And I demand that Mr. Henderson and Tiffany be held accountable for their discriminatory behavior." Ms. Davies's face turned red. "Mrs. Jefferson, this is highly inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" Maggie retorted. "What's inappropriate is treating people like second-class citizens because of the color of their skin or the amount of money in their bank account. What's inappropriate is denying someone their dreams because of your own prejudice." The crowd erupted in cheers. Maggie turned to the cameras, her voice ringing with conviction. "This is not just about me," she said. "This is about all of us. This is about creating a society where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. This is about fighting for justice, one bank, one city, one person at a time." Suddenly, the doors of the bank burst open, and a group of protesters rushed inside, chanting slogans and waving signs. The police arrived, but they were hesitant to intervene, knowing that any heavy-handed action would only escalate the situation. Chaos reigned. Mr. Henderson and Tiffany cowered behind the teller counter. Ms. Davies frantically tried to regain control, but it was too late. Maggie Jefferson had unleashed a force that could not be contained. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Ms. Davies raised her hands in surrender. "We agree to your demands, Mrs. Jefferson," she said, her voice trembling. "We will implement diversity training, review our lending practices, and take appropriate action against the employees involved." A hush fell over the crowd. Maggie smiled, a genuine smile this time, a smile of victory. "Thank you, Ms. Davies," she said. "That's good start." The aftermath of Maggie's stand was swift and far-reaching. The news of the protest spread like wildfire, igniting a national conversation about racial bias in banking. First Piedmont Bank's stock price plummeted. Their reputation was in tatters. Mr. Henderson and Tiffany were immediately suspended, pending an internal investigation. Within a week, they were both fired. Ms. Davies was reassigned to a smaller branch in a less prominent location. First Piedmont Bank announced a series of initiatives aimed at addressing its diversity and inclusion issues. They pledged to donate millions of dollars to community development programs and to increase their lending to minority-owned businesses. Maggie became a local hero. She was interviewed on national television, invited to speak at community events, and showered with awards and accolades. She used her newfound platform to advocate for economic justice and to empower marginalized communities. But for Maggie, the most rewarding outcome was the impact she had on the people around her. She received letters and emails from people all over the country, thanking her for giving them hope, for inspiring them to stand up for what they believed in. She used the money from Robert's check to expand his landscaping business, hiring new employees and providing them with good wages and benefits. She created a scholarship fund for underprivileged students, helping them to pursue their dreams. She also reconciled with her estranged daughter, a young woman named Aisha, who had been ashamed of her mother's outspokenness and her old-fashioned values. Aisha had watched the news coverage of the protest with a mixture of admiration and guilt. She realized that her mother wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for Aisha's generation, for a better future for all of them. One evening, Aisha came to visit Maggie, her eyes filled with tears. "Mom," she said, "I'm so proud of you. I was wrong to doubt you. You're an amazing woman." Maggie hugged her daughter tightly. "I love you, Aisha," she said, "and I'm proud of you too. You're a strong, intelligent woman, and you can accomplish anything you set your mind to." Years later, Maggie Jefferson was still a force to be reckoned with. She had become a respected community leader, a mentor to young activists, and a champion for social justice. First Piedmont Bank had undergone a complete transformation. Under new leadership, it had become a model of diversity and inclusion, recognized for its commitment to serving the needs of all communities. One day, Maggie received a letter from the CEO of First Piedmont Bank, inviting her to speak at the bank's annual diversity conference. Maggie hesitated. She had mixed feelings about the bank. She had fought them, exposed their flaws, and forced them to change. But she had also seen them make progress, to commit to a better future. After much deliberation, she decided to accept the invitation. She knew that her presence at the conference would send a powerful message, that even the most entrenched institutions could be transformed, that even the most deeply rooted prejudices could be overcome. At the conference, Maggie spoke with passion and eloquence. She recounted her experience at the bank, not with anger or bitterness, but with a sense of hope and possibility. She challenged the audience to continue to fight for justice, to dismantle systemic barriers, and to create a world where everyone had the opportunity to thrive. As she finished her speech, the audience rose to its feet, applauding wildly. Maggie smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She knew that the fight for justice was far from over, but she also knew that she had made a difference, that she had helped to create a more just and equitable world. Later, as she was leaving the conference, she was approached by a young black woman who introduced herself as a loan officer at First Piedmont Bank. "Mrs. Jefferson," the woman said, her voice filled with gratitude, "I just wanted to thank you. Because of you, I have a seat at the table. Because of you, I can help people in my community achieve their dreams." Maggie smiled and took the woman's hand. "That's all the reward I need, dear," she said. "Just keep fighting the good fight." Maggie walked out into the sunshine, her heart filled with hope. She knew that Robert would be proud of her, that he would be smiling down from heaven, knowing that his dream was finally coming true. And she knew that the fight for justice would continue. One bank, one city, one person at a time.